What if the last door you ever knocked on opened to a life you never imagined? Lily Carter was just 18, broken and alone, standing in the rain with nothing but a worn backpack and a heart full of silent prayers. And behind that door waited a billionaire with a contract. It was her 18th birthday, and Lily Carter spent it shivering beneath a broken awning behind a diner that no longer existed. The rain had started 2 hours ago, soaking through her worn-out hoodie, but she didn't move. She couldn't, because there was nowhere else to go. The letter from the landlord had been clear: vacate immediately. The hospital bill for her grandmother's final days had wiped out everything. Her part-time job couldn't cover rent, groceries, and the price of losing the only person who'd ever loved her. She hugged her knees tighter. Her fingers were numb, her stomach empty. But what hurt most wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the silence. The silence after her grandma's voice disappeared forever. "You're stronger than you think, Lily," her grandma used to say, tracing the girl's cheek with fragile fingers. "The world can be cruel, but don't let it make you cruel too." Lily whispered it to herself now, like a broken lullaby. But tonight it was hard to believe in anything good. That's when Grace appeared, an old friend of her grandmother's who volunteered at shelters. Grace didn't ask questions. She simply said, "I know someone who needs help around the house. You'll need to look presentable, smile, and say yes if he asks you something reasonable." Lily didn't know what to expect, but she was tired of doors that never opened. Theodore Vaughn's mansion didn't look like a home. It looked like a photograph from a magazine. Black stone, clean lines, too many windows, not one light on. The air smelled like pine and expensive cologne. The man who opened the door wasn't what Lily expected. He wasn't old. He wasn't smiling. And he wasn't particularly warm. He wore a dark gray suit and a colder expression, like the world had offered him everything, and still he trusted nothing. His eyes flicked over her in one glance, unreadable. "Name?" he asked. "Lily Carter," she replied, her voice too soft, too unsure. He gestured toward a room that looked more like a conference hall than a living room. "Sit." Grace had said this was a housekeeping job. But this didn't feel like a job interview. Felt like a transaction. Theodore sat across from her, folding his hands. "I'll be honest. I don't need a maid. I need a wife." Lily blinked. "Excuse me." He didn't flinch. "A contractual marriage. 1 year. You'll live here. Attend social events with me. Smile when needed. In return, you'll be compensated well and provided for during and after the term." She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "I have a pending merger that requires a stable public image. My previous engagement dissolved. The press is watching. I need someone harmless, quiet, easy to manage." His words were ice. "And love?" she asked, almost as a joke. "There will be no affection, no intimacy, no expectations. It's strictly business." Lily wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. But mostly she wanted to run. Until she remembered the metal bench where she had slept the night before. The hunger that felt like knives. The way people walked past her without looking. She looked at him again. Wealth dripped from everything he wore. Power clung to him like a second skin. But his eyes, they looked as empty as she felt. "What happens after the year?" she whispered. "You leave. With more than enough to start a life." It wasn't love. It wasn't fair. But it was a door. And Lily had no others left. "I don't have anything," she said, her voice cracking. "Not even a dress to wear to your events." "I'll handle that," he replied without emotion. She took a shaky breath. Her heart thundered in her chest like it wanted to run ahead of her. But her hands reached out slowly, like they already knew she had nowhere else to go. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." He nodded once. "I'll have the papers drawn by morning." She rose to her feet, and before she could stop herself said, "I'm sorry you had to create something so cold to protect yourself." He didn't answer. She walked to the door, but paused with her hand on the knob. Rain tapped against the windows again. "I hope I'm not the only one who's broken here," she said softly. Behind her, Theodore remained still, silent, a man carved from granite. But something in his jaw shifted, just barely. And as Lily Carter stepped out into the night, she didn't feel rescued. She felt resigned, like she had traded one kind of emptiness for another. But she didn't know that this cold mansion, with its contracts and conditions, was about to change her life forever. And neither did he. The contract was signed 2 days later. No flowers, no ceremony, just 2 signatures and a clause that said everything. No emotional involvement of any kind. Lily moved into the mansion that same afternoon. It was beautiful in the way hotel lobbies are. Polished, quiet, and impersonal. Every surface gleamed. Every corner echoed. And every room reminded her she didn't belong. Theodore handed her a printed sheet of rules on the first night. Curfew at 10. No entry into his office or bedroom. Public events required her presence twice a week. Minimal interaction outside of those appearances. He didn't say it cruelly. In fact, he barely spoke at all. But his tone carried a finality that made her chest tighten. Lily slept in the East Wing, in a room that looked more like a guest suite than a home. She unpacked her few belongings into drawers already half filled with expensive dresses and designer shoes she'd never wear by choice. Everything about the space felt borrowed, except her loneliness. That was real. In public, Theodore held her hand. They smiled for cameras. They danced at charity galas, posed at business dinners, and played the part of a polished couple. His hand on the small of her back looked convincing, but it felt like glass. Cold, transparent, breakable. At home, he barely looked at her. They passed each other in silence, like strangers staying in the same hotel for too long. Lily tried to make herself useful. She cleaned the library, organized the kitchen, tended the overgrown garden. She left meals on the counter even though she knew he wouldn't touch them. She whispered goodnight through closed doors, knowing he wouldn't respond. Some nights, she cried into the pillow just to remember how it felt to release something. But she never broke the rules. Not even once. One evening, just past midnight, Lily couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt heavier than usual. She wandered toward the West Wing, her bare feet soundless against the marble. She paused near Theodore's office. The door was slightly ajar, a rare crack in his world. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. He was sitting at his desk, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. In his hands, an old photograph. His thumb traced the edge of it like it held something fragile. From her angle, she could just make out the image. A woman, elegant but worn, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lily stepped back, her foot accidentally brushing the edge of the door. Creak. Just enough. Theodore looked up sharply. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. He stood, clearing his throat, slipping the photo into a drawer. His expression shifted, stone returning to stone. "You're not allowed in this wing," he said, calm but guarded. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. "I was just walking." He stared at her for a beat too long, as if searching for something she didn't even know she was offering. Then softly he asked, "Do you always walk into places you're not welcome?" "No," she said. "Just ones that feel empty." She turned before he could respond. And this time he didn't stop her. The next day he left earlier than usual. But something shifted. He didn't slam the door on his way out. He paused before speaking. And once, just once, Lily caught him watching her from across the garden, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. She started noticing him too. The way his hand trembled slightly when he poured coffee. How he paused at the top of the stairs every morning, like preparing himself to step back into the performance of being him. He watched her sing to the plants in the greenhouse, water the flowers no one else saw. He saw the way she smiled at the sky, even when it didn't smile back. Something was unraveling, quietly, slowly. And then, one evening, they were in the same room for longer than 2 minutes. She was placing books back into the shelf. He was pouring a drink by the fireplace. The silence was no longer heavy. It was curious. Finally he asked, "Why do you never ask me questions?" She looked up from the book in her hands. "What kind of questions?" "About me. This house. My past. You're living in my world, and yet you don't try to understand it." Lily studied him for a moment. "Because you never seem to want to be seen." He blinked. The glass in his hand tightened slightly. She continued, her voice steady but soft. "People who build walls that high usually do it because they're hiding the part of themselves they're afraid will break if someone gets too close." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the window, his reflection overlapping with the dark world outside. And Lily, standing there in a home that wasn't hers, wearing a ring that meant nothing, felt something shift between them. Not love. Not yet. But something just as dangerous. Possibility. And for the first time since signing the contract, Lily Carter didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Even if only for a moment. The storm started just after sunset. Wind howled through the trees like distant voices trying to be heard, and rain struck the windows with the desperation of 1,000 unanswered prayers. Lily sat on the floor of the library, curled in a blanket, a book open but unread in her lap. The lightning lit up the room in flashes, casting shadows on the walls that danced and disappeared like ghosts. Then the lights went out. She froze. The silence that followed was complete. No electricity humming, no artificial warmth. Just the sound of the storm. And her heartbeat. She was about to find a flashlight when a faint glow appeared from down the hall. Theodore entered, holding a candle, the flickering flame softening the angles of his face. "No generator?" she asked, her voice low. "Being repaired," he said, setting the candle on the table between them. "I forgot how dark this place gets." She nodded, unsure if she should leave. But he didn't move either. Instead, he sat in the chair across from her and stared at the flame for a long moment. Then quietly he spoke. "My mother used to light candles when she couldn't afford the power bill." Lily blinked. He had never volunteered personal details before. She didn't dare interrupt. She'd pretend it was on purpose. Called it our evening magic. Said it made everything feel warmer. Safer. He paused. "She drank to forget. My father drank to remember. Neither of them ever really saw me." Lily's chest ached, not just for the child he once was, but for the man still carrying that weight. "I learned early," he continued, "that people only show up when they need something. Love was always conditional. Always a transaction." "That's why the contract," she said softly. He nodded. "It keeps things clean. Predictable." "But people aren't clean or predictable," she said. "They're messy. Complicated. Worth knowing anyway." The candlelight flickered again. And for the first time, Theodore looked at her without armor. "I'm sorry for what you've lost," he said. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry you never had it to begin with." There was a stillness between them then, one that felt more like presence than silence. And then, without warning, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of any agreement. But it was real. His lips were warm and unsure, like someone touching something they didn't know they deserved. She responded before she could think, heart racing, breath catching. And just as suddenly as it started, he pulled away. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered, standing too fast. His eyes avoided hers, jaw clenched. She didn't stop him. Couldn't. She just sat there shaken. Not because she was upset, but because she wasn't. She wanted more. And that terrified her. The next morning, things returned to the way they were, at least on the surface. Theodore kept his distance. She didn't ask questions. But something had changed. And it followed them into the next chapter. The merger Theodore had been pursuing for months was finally happening. But his future business partner, Charles Holloway, requested a private dinner to meet the woman behind the headlines. So, Lily dressed in a soft navy gown and let the stylist curl her hair. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. But the ache in her chest was all too familiar. Dinner was held at an exclusive rooftop restaurant. Lily played her part, smiling, listening, laughing when appropriate. But she wasn't pretending. She spoke from the heart, answered honestly, and carried herself with grace and quiet strength. Charles Holloway was clearly impressed. "She's a rare one, Vaughn," he said, sipping his wine. "Genuine. Grounded. You're lucky." Lily caught Theodore's eyes for a fraction of a second. He looked almost proud. Almost. The next morning, headlines filled the business section. Vaughn's marriage, the secret to his stability? The golden couple everyone's watching. That evening, Lily found him in his study, reading the article. His expression was unreadable. She waited for him to say something, anything. Instead, he closed the laptop and said, "Let's not forget what this is." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The contract. The arrangement. That dinner last night was part of the plan." She stepped back, eyes wide. "Is that all it was to you? A plan? It was always supposed to be a performance. But that kiss..." She stopped herself. He said nothing. Tears welled up, but she refused to let them fall. "Why are you so afraid to feel anything real?" "Because real things end," he snapped. "And they leave you with nothing." Her voice cracked. "Then maybe you never really had anything at all." He looked away. She turned to leave, her hand trembling on the doorknob. "I never asked for your love, Lily," he said quietly. She didn't turn back. Her voice was steady, even as her heart broke. "No. But I hoped you'd want it anyway." And then she was gone. She packed that night. Just one suitcase. No drama. No note. In the morning, she stood in the grand hallway one last time. The house felt colder, emptier than ever. He didn't try to stop her. She paused at the door, looked back once, not at the man, but at the life she thought might grow here. "You needed a wife," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to be loved." And with that, Lily Carter walked away from the only home she'd ever known that wasn't built on love, but on rules, silence, and a contract that could never hold a heart. Lily had never known silence like the one that filled her tiny bedroom now. It wasn't the kind that comforted, it echoed. The kind that made every breath feel a little heavier. She was back in her friend Julia's apartment, a cramped space above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. Should have felt safe. Familiar. But nothing felt like home anymore. Her heart still carried the weight of his name. Theodore Vaughn. She'd left without drama. No confrontation. No accusations. Just a quiet goodbye. One suitcase. One tear-stained pillow. And a heart that wouldn't stop breaking. Now her days were simple. She worked mornings at a bookstore, stocking shelves and restocking coffee for sleepy readers. At night, she took the bus to school, slipping into a back seat in her literature class, scribbling notes she barely understood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And it was hers. She told herself this was better. That love, if you could call what they had love, wasn't supposed to hurt that much. And yet it did. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The way he'd clench his jaw when he was angry. The rare softness in his voice when he said her name. The silence that always came afterward, as if he were punishing himself for feeling anything at all. And maybe he was. Across the city, Theodore Vaughn stood in his office, the skyline of Manhattan stretching out before him like a kingdom he no longer wanted. He had everything and somehow nothing. His assistant slid a folder across his desk that morning. $1 billion merger with terms so favorable he could hardly believe it. But he read the fine print. Factory overseas. Unsafe labor. Environmental violations. He closed the folder slowly and pushed it back. No. The word surprised even him. Theodore had spent his entire adult life making decisions without blinking. But now he hesitated, rethought, refused. Not because it was bad for business, but because Lily wouldn't have approved. Since she'd left, everything had changed. He'd started visiting his mother at the long-term care facility. She didn't remember much anymore, But when she looked at him, her smile was real. He brought her daffodils every Tuesday, Lily's favorite flower. He also began to write. First it was chaos, then clarity. He filled pages and pages of letters he never sent. Letters to Lily. Letters to himself. Letters to the boy he used to be before the world taught him to stop feeling. It began with curiosity. He had asked his driver to follow her bus route once. Just once. But he returned the next night. And the next. He parked across from the school building, staying in the shadows. Watching her walk out with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Tired but smiling. He never approached. Never called out. He wasn't ready. She was light. And he was still trying to believe he could be anything but cold. But on the fourth night something shifted. Lily stopped at the edge of the steps, her head tilting slightly. As if she felt him there. Saw him. Their eyes met from across the street. He didn't move. Didn't wave. Just stood there. Heart pounding like a boy too young to understand what it meant to lose something precious. She didn't cross the street. But she didn't look away either. The next evening, Lily opened her locker at school and found a white envelope. Her name, written in familiar handwriting that made her fingers tremble. She waited until she was home to open it. Inside was a letter. Simple paper, no logo, no signature at the top. Just words. His words. Lily, I never believed in love. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I deserved it. I thought love was a lie people told each other to make life less lonely. I thought commitment was a cage, not a choice. But then you arrived. 18, innocent, and far too good for the world you walked into. You didn't just touch my life. You unraveled it. And in that unraveling I found something terrifying. And beautiful. Hurt you. Not out of cruelty. Out of fear. I thought pushing you away would protect you from the damage I bring. But I see now that the only thing I truly broke was my own chance at happiness. You once told me love wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up, even when it's hard. So here I am. No contracts. No clauses. Just me. If you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you. Every single day. Lily didn't realize she was crying until the ink blurred slightly in her hands. She folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. Sometimes the most powerful kind of love isn't the one that sweeps you off your feet. It's the one that meets you exactly where you are, and chooses to stay. 1 year later. The spring breeze carried the scent of lilacs as guests gathered in a sunlit garden. Soft music drifting in the background. Lily stood under an archway of white roses, her dress simple, elegant, just like her. Theodore stood before her. No longer the man who lived behind walls. He had torn them down for her, brick by brick. This time there were no contracts. No rules. Just two hearts learning how to heal together. When he leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't a kiss for show. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a promise. One he would keep every day of their lives.